All right, embalming fluids. Woohoo! So we've talked a little bit about how things happen in the body. We've talked about how these individual elements and how they react with body tissues. We've talked a little bit about kind of how to get the job done. So let's talk about the guts of it, the actual embalming fluids. What do? So there's 4 general types of embalming chemicals, and I am going to be using the nomenclature from the embalming book rather than this chemistry book, because when I went to mortuary school, this was not clarified for me. The instructor did not say, hey, you know, this is a problem, this is the way you should think of it. It was just tough crap, this is what this book says, that's what that book says, and live with it. So, no, this is a much easier way for you to kind of wrap your minds around it. Arterial fluids, cavity fluids, everyone's universal with those. But then supplemental fluids and accessory chemicals, that's where stuff starts going south, okay? And as we walk through them, I will explain them in detail. Your chemistry book refers to accessory fluids. Well, these are more appropriately defined as supplementals. The intention of these fluids is to augment your arterial solution. Your chemistry book also refers to autopsy chemicals. Well, these are more properly defined as accessory chemicals, because accessory chemicals are chemicals that are not used by being placed in an embalming machine, and they include the creams, powders, gels, carbolic acids, etc. So with supplements, it goes in the tank. It's meant to help you during your arterial injection to get adequate and sufficient embalming accomplished. Accessory happens after you're done and you are treating the body after. So if you just call it an autopsy chemical, oh, that's what you use just when you autopsy a body. No, there are plenty of reasons why you would use a preservative, cream, or a gel with an unautopsied body. So first, arterial fluids are those embalming chemicals that are injected via the circulatory system. They include the preservatives and germicides, as well as any modifying and supplemental chemicals added to the basic fluid. The preservatives are some of the most important components of the arterial fluid. Yeah, no kidding. They're included because of their inability to inactivate saproprophytic bacteria and render unsuitable for nutrition the media upon which these bacteria thrive. If you've read like the first couple chapters in the embalming book, you know that was cut and pasted pretty much right out of it, because that's the way it looks at it. That's another definition of embalming or preservation. Inactivating saprophytic bacteria and rendering unsuitable for nutrition the meat upon which these bacteria thrive. It kills the bugs and it kills the stuff that they eat. That's exactly what this says. They will also arrest decomposition by converting the tissues into a form less suitable for decomposition and by altering the enzymes of the body that cause the decomposition to occur. So it converts the tissues to protein coagulate. Okay, this is formaldehyde, removes the peptide bond, forms a solid coagulate. Not as easy to break that down. And then it also inactivates the enzymes because the enzyme is a nitrogen base. So it goes in, shuts it down temporarily. Because of their multiple actions, many of the preservatives are disinfectants as well. When studying the chemicals, make sure you are note carding primary and secondary uses. The easiest way to do this is to go to the appropriate chapter in the embalming book where it talks about the chemicals with their primary and secondary uses. Don't have to, attack it and try to get original and read between the lines. The author of the embalming book already did that. Common preservatives, you should be able to rattle this out. Aldehydes, alcohols, and carbolic acids, phenolic compounds, coal tar derivatives, whatever you want to call them. So, this chapter decides to add another buddy. We knew formaldehyde or methanol. We knew glutaraldehyde, that was number 2. And then finally, acetaldehyde, okay? Ethanol being the 3rd most important preservative. Alcohols, nothing new here. Methanol, ethanol, isopropanol. Don't forget wood alcohol, grain alcohol, rubbing alcohol, that sort of stuff. Phenol and cresol under the coal tar derivatives. So supplemental germicides. Now we're into components of arterial fluids, okay? This could also be a supplement, but generally these are components right now. You don't usually go grab a supplemental germicide and pour it in. It's usually germicides are built into your arterial fluid automatically. Supplemental germicides are chemicals added specifically for the purpose of destroying disease-causing microorganisms. The more common germicides are quaternary ammonium compounds, or quats, and glutaraldehyde. And I think by now you should know all about the primary and secondary use of glutaraldehyde. Quarter ammonium compounds are not used in basic formulation of arterial embalming fluids because of their incompatibility with some of the other components. So it's much more likely you're going to encounter a glutaraldehyde as a supplemental germicide. They are more commonly found, however, quarts, in cold sterilization formulations. So you pour it in the dunk tank, you drop your instruments in it, that is more than likely going to be a quaternary ammonium compound. You can also find quarts in cavity chemicals where you don't have a bunch of the other supplements that you would need for an arterial fluid. Dyes are the coloring agents. That's a hard one, okay, because they impart a definite color to the fluid. In some cases, produce a coloration effect on the tissues of the body. Now, your book, chemistry book doesn't go into it, but you do have required reading out of that in the embalming book. And there are two types of dyes. Active dyes, which color the body, and inactive dyes just make the fluid look pretty and do nothing else. Eosine and erythrosine are used primarily to color the embalmed tissues, and they are orange and red, respectively. Punso red is a red dye. I would hope so. Used primarily to color the embalming fluid, as it has little coloring effect on the body tissues. Perfuming agents, deodorants, masking agents are chemicals which either have the ability to destroy odors by altering their substances that cause them, or they have the ability to cover or mask the unpleasant odor. Remember, if you use a perfuming agent, if your manufacturer utilizes one, it does not take away from the danger of utilizing the chemical if it has organic vapors. You can still become overwhelmed, still suffer ill health. It just makes it smell better while you're using it so that you do not have the immediate unpleasant, oh my gee, that stinks. In an arterial fluid, their function is to enhance the odor of the embalming fluid, but again, will not eliminate the odor of formaldehyde or its effect on the operator. Nothing sucks worse than an overexposure to formaldehyde or embalmer's pneumonia. That really, really sucks. Take my word on it, you don't want to deal with it. So common masking agents, methyl salicylate or oil of wintergreen, benzaldehyde, oil of bitter almonds, oil of sassafras, oil of cloves. Make a chart. Put all the stuff on here. This is what this is. This is what this is. Vehicles, diluents, solvents serve as the carriers of the components found in the embalming fluid. They must be miscible. They must be able to combine easily with the other components found in the embalming solution, and they must not react with the other components in any manner that would interfere with their action on the tissues of the body. It'd be kind of stupid if you used a vehicle that you put it in with the formalin and methyl alcohol and your dye and your supplemental germicides, and it forms jello. That would completely defeat the purpose because there's no way you're going to be able to inject it. Some of the vehicles used, such as the alcohols, might serve more than one function. Obviously, if you're using alcohols, methyl alcohol, that's also going to be a stabilizing agent for the methylene glycol. So yeah, it serves as a vehicle, keeps everything happy, and keeps your preservative effective. Triple win. The most common vehicles used are water, alcohols, and organic solvents. And as a reminder, water is not an organic solvent. Okay? Organic solvents, your acetones, your stuff like that. Modifying agents are chemicals for which there may be greatly varying demands depending upon the type of embalming, the environment, and the embalming fluid to be used. The embalming analysis or case analysis, okay, will determine if an embalmer needs to increase the concentration of any given component in an arterial formulation. Hey, this is where, your time and skill that you put into developing yourself as an embalmer comes into play. It's good to know how things work by themselves. It's entirely something else to know that, hey, if I take something, as an example, I got a call from one of my graduates, Big Jim, okay? And Big Jim is working up near the Orlando area at a funeral home. And he takes his time embalming. He's usually in and out in about an hour and a half. And almost everything he does comes out picture perfect. He doesn't have bad cases. He takes the time to get it done. So he calls me and says, hey, I'm using two chemicals. And these are two chemicals that I use here in the lab. And my results are blotchy as hell. What the hell's going on? Well, if you had studied embalming, you finished embalming 1, and you see what the results are. You might say, oh, well, you're probably adding too much water buffer or something like that, because that's why you're getting this blotchy effect from these two things, because I'm not seeing that here when I do it. Well, then he speaks to his chemical rep. And my chemical rep, Jay Rhodes from Dodge Chemical, this guy's like a walking Wikipedia of embalming knowledge. Dude, he's nuts. He's so good at what he does. It's like he's forgotten more than I'll ever learn. And he says, hey, yeah, when you mix this chemical and this chemical, there is a reaction and the dyes don't work as well. You either have to use this chemical and this chemical, and you'll get the same results you're looking for because it uses a different type of dye. The only way you know that is by talking to people, reading about it, etc. So make sure that you use your experience and listen to people when they're telling you how to mix stuff, what works well together, etc. So what type of modifying agents do we have? We have humectants, buffers, conditioning agents, or water conditioning agents, and surfactants. Bears mentioning that most of these are already found in arterial fluids. Okay, that's why you're buying this pre-mixed stuff. This is already pre-mixed with a certain intent in mind, so that you don't need to add stuff to it. So, for instance, if I was to go out there and I was to grab one of my favorite chemicals on the market, Dodge Intrafiant, OTC, the original stuff. Okay, if I grab that and I pour it in, fast acting and penetrating. Well, I know it probably has surfactants in there. I know it probably has very little humectant or modifiers, because we want the formaldehyde reaction to be immediate. So by looking at a label, looking at a description, you can pretty much figure out some of the stuff that might already be in it. First and foremost is humectants, and this is one of my favorite chemicals on earth, restorative. Like I would buy this stuff by the 20-gallon drum if I could. This is such a fun little chemical. Humectants are chemicals which are used to create an increased capability for embalmed tissues to retain moisture. They might be added to a relatively weak solution of embalming fluid when embalming a body predisposed to dehydration or is severely emaciated. So you're using this to keep moisture in the body. Any humectant that you use is used to keep moisture in the body. A side effect of most humectants is that they coat the formaldehyde molecules in the solution, which delays their release. So if you're looking to get an immediate firm, or you're using an immediate firming chemical, if you want to kind of slow that down, you add a humectant to it in most cases. Common humectants: glycerol or glycerin, sorbitol, glycols, and lanolin. Lanolin acts as an emollient when injected into the body. It coats. Your book references a relatively weak solution of embalming fluid when encountering a dehydration or severe emaciation. I want to address that, because that might lead you astray if you don't know how to understand what it's saying. It's referring to that you do not use an unnecessarily strong arterial solution, which may further dehydrate the body. Okay? A weak solution will certainly cause water to remain in the body, but you don't want to retain water at the risk of not meeting preservative demand. So because you have an emaciated body, that's telling you should not go right for like the Power Tone 30 or the Intrafiant OTC and jacking that body up till it glows in the dark and you can see it from Mars. It's going to dehydrate. It's going to get awful real quick. But you also shouldn't say, oh, I'm going to take this and make a 0.5% solution of Intrafiant, because then you're also not meeting formaldehyde demand and residual demand. So you really have to play it smart when you're making solutions and understanding what they're talking about, which is why I'm kind of translating that for you if you don't understand it. The buffers. These are chemicals which have a stabilizing effect on the acid-base balance of the embalming solution in the tissues of the body. It's no small secret. Read the embalming book. It says that embalming takes place embalming occurs better in certain pH zones. If it's highly acidic or highly basic, doesn't work as well. If I recall, and I am old, and I haven't looked at the embalming book for several months now, I want to say it's a slightly basic environment, okay? And during decomposition, if the body's in full-blown going that way, you are having an acidic reaction. Body's becoming increasingly acidic, can drop down to like the 5s during decomposition. So you're going to need something like rectifiant to build that back up, at least to as close to neutral, slightly basic, or alkaline as possible, so that the formaldehyde has the best chance of actually doing its job. And obviously, if you have a highly acidic environment and decomposition is in full bore, you're going to have to inject a lot more formaldehyde to meet demand and to create a residual. Some chemicals are even inactivated by tremendous shifts in the hydrogen ion concentration. So if the pH goes too high or too low, the chemical just doesn't work. 99% of the time, if it ends in ATE, it's probably a buffer or a water conditioner. Okay? So borax, sodium phosphate, citrates, sodium salt of EDTA. Salts of EDTA are generally not incorporated directly into the basic arterial embalming fluid because they don't play well with other stuff in the fluid. And yes, I can't say ethylene diamine tetrasodium acetate. Yeah, that's right, yo. Don't hate the player, hate the game. This is why I love memes and I love PowerPoint. Water softeners. Water softeners, anticoagulants, water conditioning agents are chemicals which are used to help neutralize hard water. Hard water contains certain ions which would cause the blood to coagulate when it comes in contact with it. Okay? To prevent this coagulation from occurring, the addition of the anticoagulant will cause a sequestering of the ions which cause this clotting, which basically means no clots. If it's going to hold off the stuff that causes the clots, your clots aren't going to happen. Things aren't going to get blocked. Your job in your life should be easier. So some common anticoagulants are sodium citrate, sodium salt of EDTA, oxalate salts. And oxalate salts are generally not used because of their toxicity. Might be a couple of compounds that actually use because of absolute necessity. It's like, hey, we don't put asbestos in homes because of what it does, but there are some places where asbestos is the best decision for fire preventative. A rule of thumb is that all water softeners are buffers, but not all buffers are water softeners. And what I mean by that is go back and look at the list, and you're going to see that, just about everything that was a buffer is a water softener. Surfactants, surface active agents, wetting agents, surface tension reducers, penetrating agents, blah, 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 blah. Reduce the molecular cohesion of a liquid and thereby enable the fluid to flow through smaller apertures. Makes the molecules smaller, so to speak, and they can fit through smaller holes better. Surfactants are the substances which cause the sheeting action in dishwasher detergents, which prevents spots from forming on glasses. They inhibit the formation of drops due to their ability to disrupt the surface tension of the liquid. In the body, the action relates to the embalming solution as it approaches the cell membrane. Surfactants enable diffusion across the membranes, allowing better penetration of the embalming solution. As I said, way to wrap your mind around it, makes everything a little bit smaller so it fits through those small holes better. Most common surfactants are sulfonates and sodium lauryl sulfate. Cavity fluids. Those embalming chemicals which are intended to be injected into the cavities of the body following aspiration. Because they're not intended to be arterially injected, the components are not identical to those found in arterial fluid. Most embalming machines out there come with the warning, do not put cavity fluid in this, it will void your warranty. They're not intended to be used in that method. Some components are similar, preservatives, germicide, etc., and some are not going to be present, dyes, humectants, okay, stuff like that. These three sections that are coming up next are cut and paste jobs from the arterial fluid section of the chapter. I see no difference in the description of preservative, etc., etc. So I'm just not going to, beat it to death. As I stated at the beginning of the chapter, I'm going to be using nomenclature from the embalming book rather than what is listed here. Accessory fluids are supplemental, or accessory fluids, as listed in your chemistry book, are supplemental fluids. And supplemental fluids are those specialized fluids used in addition to other embalming fluids or instead of another embalming fluid. Rule of thumb, if it goes in the tank, it's a supplemental. So pre-injections, okay, are those chemical formulations that would be used to flush out the circulatory system before the normal embalming fluid is injected arterially. So before I put in any preservative, I'm going to do a flush just to make sure that everything's ready for me to go. And that makes some sense because as you inject your formaldehyde-based solution, it's going to be reacting on the walls of the arteries and veins and all that stuff. Those pores in your capillaries are going to harden because the formaldehyde is going to be preserving those things first. Well, if you want to make sure that you can get as much out as possible, you do something like this so that when you are ready to put in the formaldehyde solution, immediately from the get-go, you are increasing the likelihood of better penetration. Sometimes these are also called capillary washes, okay? Called capillary washes. They usually contain surfactants, anticoagulants, humectants, and in very rare cases, very low concentration of preservative. Personally, I cannot name a pre-injection solution with preservative in it, but that's just me. I haven't actually gone out looking for one. The argument would be made if it has a preservative, it's no longer a pre-injection, it is an arterial fluid. That would be the argument that most professors would make. Co-injections are much like pre-injection fluids in that they are used to prepare the circulatory system so as to enhance the ability of the embalming fluid to penetrate the tissues of the body. They are used in conjunction with the arterial embalming fluid. And the general difference between pre-injection fluid and co-injection fluid is when they're actually used. In most cases, you'll see most chemicals will say a pre or co-injection. So it's a pre-injection if you inject it prior to putting in any arterial fluid, is a co-injection when you actually pour fluid in it, mix it all up, and then inject it with your arterial fluid. And I give you I give you the breakdown. If you take a bottle of 1 point or Metaflow, 1 point is Pierce, Metaflow is Dodge, I believe, along with a bottle of water conditioner, pour them into a tank with a half gallon of water and inject it, you have a pre-injection. There's no preservative there. It's all non-preservative items. If you take the same stuff, add into the tank with several bottles of arterial solution, some dye, and top off the tank with water, you now have a co-injection because you're actively preserving while you are injecting. Restorative fluids, these are used to enhance the natural lifelike appearance of the body. 99% of cases, they're a humectant chemical of some sort. Another class of chemicals not mentioned in this book are specialty chemicals or specialty fluids. There's an ongoing debate among the academics and funeral service about how to handle these. In this category of specialty fluids, you almost always have just two items. High index fluids, which we are seeing more and more of just uniformly because of the effects of long-term medical care on the body and pharmaceutical therapies and stuff like that, and jaundice. Okay? So specialty fluids are actual types of arterial fluids rather than supplements or anything else. Jaundice fluids are special fluids used to minimize or reduce the effects of jaundice on the body while embalming. Most jaundice fluids contain low concentrations of formaldehyde, as well as a bleaching and reducing agent to help reduce the jaundice discoloration, with heavy dyes to counterstain the tissue. A lot of them come in two-part form like you see here. We have Dodge's version, John Defiant Basic and John Defiant Control. And some of you out there might be losing your minds. Well, my funeral home, we just use Eccles. My funeral home, we just use Pierce. Hey, here in Miami-Dade, we use both Dodge and Pierce chemicals. I like certain Dodge chemicals. I like certain Pierce chemicals. I would keep both, in an ideal world in my cabinets because I like what certain ones do. Main reason why I have a lot of Dodge products on my slides is one, I learned on Dodge. I know how to use Dodge a little bit better than Pierce. But above all else, I can access their website and download really high-quality pictures, like at a moment's notice. Pierce, a little more difficult to do that. So I'm just going to go with what makes my life easy, and that's why we see so many pictures. But you would inject with one to kind of flush the body, then you inject with the other to kind of counterstain in case a reaction occurs. And your embalming book will actually explain in one of the chapters how that jaundice reaction occurs. Okay? It's an oxidation reaction. It goes into very specifics. I'm not going to beat you up with that because you have enough already to learn in this subject. I will beat you up embalming with that when you're actually supposed to be reading it. So because of the low concentration of preservatives, the index on these things may be, really crappy, anywhere between like 10 and 13 index. I can't really read the label on the bottle, but it's probably like 11 or 12. you're going to have to use a lot of it. Okay, you're going to have to use a lot of it to get the results that you need. And a concern with any type of jaundice chemical is, am I actually meeting my formaldehyde demand and also establishing a formaldehyde residual? Because it takes a lot of this stuff. As an example, John Defiant 11 index, make it easy, 10 index, to get even close to the type of preservative that you would need in something like one bottle of Intrafiant, you'd probably have to use like 3 or 4 bottles of John Defiant just to get close to Intrafiant. Look how much more fluid that is to put in the body. So these are the type of decisions you have to make. And your embalming book, your restorative art book, and even now I am telling you because it's so important, you always go for preservation over cosmetic when you are embalming. Your job is to make sure that the body is preserved. You can counter stain, you can do whatever that you need, but if you do not meet the formaldehyde demand and the formaldehyde residual, you will never be able to fix the jaundice thing. And the jaundice thing is a huge problem because it is a buildup of nitrogen in the body. So you're turning yellow literally from all the garbage that is being stored by the kidneys that can't get rid of, and all of that is going to react against your formaldehyde solution. So it is a really, really fine line you have to walk between meeting your needs to preserve and also trying to get the best cosmetic situation so that you have acceptable results in the casket. But at the end of the day, that's what cosmetics are for. If you need to airbrush or face cake it, you're just going to have to do something and advise the family accordingly. The second one are high-index fluids. High-index fluids are special preservative fluids used to meet a very high formaldehyde demand of certain embalming cases. Your embalming textbook, I believe, refers to high index as anything over 25 index. A lot of chemicals these days are like, 25 or higher index. So it's not back in the old days where you had 1 or 2 in that category. So I don't know where that's going to go, but just understand that high-index fluids are a specialty arterial fluid. They're not really a supplement. They're intended for, hey, in this case, use this. Bears mentioning that there are supplemental chemicals to be used in the case of edema. Always let your embalming analysis determine your best course of action. If you use several bottles of high-index fluid to create a hypertonic solution to dehydrate the waterlogged case, or if you should use a supplemental moisture reducer like Edema Co. or something, I can't remember what the other names are, along with a more appropriate arterial chemical. That's a decision you have to make. If you use the higher formaldehyde, create a hypertonic solution, it's going to pull water out, and you're putting in a lot of formaldehyde. But you might overdo it and cause a problem. If you just used edema reducer, that's, those are the hard decisions you have to make when you're embalming. And that's why you need to monitor your results and re-inject if necessary. And finally, accessory chemicals, okay? So these are those autopsy chemicals that your book was talking about. Accessory chemicals are those chemicals used specifically to embalm those areas of the body that cannot be arterially injected in an autopsied or unautopsied body. And there's 2 general varieties, solid hardening compounds and liquid gel preparations. Creams are basically the liquid gels, okay? Again, an important distinction, accessory chemicals are not just for autopsied bodies. Opening paragraph here might lead you to believe that, we just use these for autopsy. No, there are plenty of reasons why you would use Viscera or hardening compound and plastic garments on an unautopsied body because of things like edema, because of things like diabetes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So hardening compounds are solid autopsy chemicals used to treat the viscera in the cavities of the unautopsied body. And I think I have a problem there on the slides. I'm going to fix it after this recording. But it should say hardening compounds are solid autopsy chemicals used to treat the visceral cavities of the autopsied body. Otherwise, you would not be able to have access to the guts. Again, you got to love that speech recognition crap. The components of these compounds are preservatives, dehydrating agents, and a filler of some sort. Paraformaldehyde, the solid form of formaldehyde gas, is the most common preservative. Aluminum chloride, alum, and plaster of Paris will act as dehydrating agents, And then perlite, vermiculite, or cellulose, sawdust act as a filler. So all they do, they just take up space. I'll take up space and help absorb some moisture rather than just pull moisture out. Liquid or gel preparations are used to embalm autopsy bodies are very similar in their components to the hardening compounds, except they usually don't have fillers. And especially liquids and gels, these can be used also in unautopsied bodies as well. Gel preparations are semi-solid, so as to be able to be applied directly to tissue and expected to remain attached because preservation is going to take place due to direct contact. Now, you have something here. You have Feature Builder and Caleb Stay Cream. Neither of them is a preservative, okay? Accessory chemicals are those chemicals that we use after the embalming process, outside of arterial embalming, outside of cavity embalming or cavity fluids, because you can use obviously hardening compound and stuff like that. Do not think for a second that if someone throws a picture of Caleb up here and says, what category do these go into? And it's like, well, I don't remember. It's a wax. It says poses lips and eyes, smooths wrinkles. Chances are pretty good. It's not an arterial fluid. It's not a cavity fluid. Doesn't sound like something you'd put in your tank. One category left. It's an accessory. Mold inhibitors are chemicals which prevent or inhibit the formation of mold on the body surface. Carbonated Vaseline may be applied to a body surface such as the face before applying the cosmetics to reduce the possibility of mold from forming on the body. And the other big one for a mold inhibitor is paradichlorobenzene. And that's usually placed in a sealed casket to prevent mold from forming on the body during mausoleum entombment. Paradichlorobenzene can also be a component of the hardening compounds or embalming or preservative powders because, again, you want to make sure the mold doesn't form. Just as an aside, once mold forms, you have to burn it off. So you're either having to scrape it off, then you're having to cauterize it, then you're going to put the preventative on it, okay? There is no way just to kill mold without actually removing it and then treating the surface once it's been removed if it starts to occur. Shelf life. The shelf life of embalming fluid refers to how long the fluid will maintain its ability to serve its purpose when stored before use. There are varying factors that affect shelf life, and as you can remember, there were things that affected formaldehyde's ability to stay in methylene glycol form, and they're all there. Temperature, amount of methanol present. Remember, methyl alcohol is a stabilizing agent. pH of the solution, exposure to light, and just how long is it sitting? Okay, how long is it sitting? Extreme temperatures can cause polymerization, which transforms the methylene glycol into paraformaldehyde, and obviously methanol helps reduce that. The length of time obviously influences many of the categories because it influences exposure, influences the time it is subjected to heat differentials or cold differentials. The average shelf life of embalming fluids between 2 and 5 years. This is due to the fact that in time, even methanol will oxidize to formaldehyde, and then once that's turned into formaldehyde, there's no more stabilizing agent. So it's very much a necessity that when you are purchasing, if you become responsible for purchasing chemicals in your prep room, and chemicals are coming in, that you date your shipments, that you make sure that the old stuff goes out first before you start using the stuff you just got in. pH obviously refers to the acidity or alkalinity of the solution. Formaldehyde can be readily oxidized to formic acid when there are shifts in the pH of the fluid, which is why most fluids have buffers to help mitigate the problem. And finally, some of the dyes found in embalming fluid may also oxidize, which causes a color change. Now, worst case scenario, that's all that, or best case scenario, that's all that is. Just changes the color of the solution and you don't care. Worst case scenario, the dye actually affects the body coloration differently than it should or not as well. So again, take proper steps to make sure that you are utilizing the right type of or the oldest fluids that you have before you start putting the newest fluids in front of it. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it. One more chapter to go, and we will see you there.